is Jessica Klein, and I will be talking about exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhage. Exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhage, also known as bleeding or bleeding attacks, refers to the presence of blood in the airways of the lungs associated with exercise. I am not a vet, but I do have some experience in this field because I have a horse that bleeds whenever I take him to a barrel race. I was not prepared and honestly scared when I first saw blood coming out of his nose. Because of this, I want to inform other people about bleeding and how it is treatable and controllable. EIPH affects many equine athletes. People need to know more about it and how to manage it. During this speech, I will go over what EIPH is, how it occurs, and if so, how is it treatable. First, let's talk about exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhage and what it is. Exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhage, also known as bleeding or bleeding attacks, is when a horse's capillaries burst whenever put under stressful exercise. The Horse magazine says that in studies of thoroughbreds and standardbreds where the horses were scoped, which means had their windpipes endoscopically examined, 60 to 90 minutes after racing, bleeding was detected in 50 to 60% of them. In studies where the same horses were examined after 3 races, almost 90% of them bled on at least one of these occasions. Scoping is a way to figure out if a horse is bleeding. A small tube is run down the trachea of the horse's lungs to see if there is any bleeding or irritation of the lungs. Another indicator of bleeding is the presence of red blood cell breakdown product hemorrhagin in lung macrophages, a type of immune defense. These are detected with tracheal wash or bronchoalveolar lavage, BAL, in which a small amount of fluid is placed into the lung and then drawn out for analysis, essentially washing part of the lungs. Studies have shown that almost all racehorses have hemorrhagin-laden pathogens in lung secretions, indicating that some degree of bleeding has occurred in the recent past. Horses can bleed internally and externally. If a horse bleeds externally, it will come out of their nose and you will easily be able to tell. But if a horse bleeds internally, the only way you will be able to find out is taking them to a trusted vet. A company called Flair gives a good definition on what EIPH is. Lung bleeding, also known as exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhage, is a silent injury that can go undetected by trainers and riders because it occurs deep in the lungs. EIPH occurs when fragile pulmonary blood vessels in the lungs rupture during exercise. This lung bleeding is best detected by lung washes or endoscopic examination, washing or scoping. Understanding what EIPH is will help you understand how to treat it. Now that we've talked about what EIPH is, now we're going to talk about how it occurs. Bleeding occurs when the capillaries in horses' lungs rupture. This is due to strenuous and intense exercise. A website called Merkel Manual explains it perfectly. It states, the proposed physiological mechanism for pulmonary hemorrhage includes high pulmonary vascular pressures during maximal exercise, with resultant thickening of pulmonary vein walls and decreased luminal diameter and increased intravascular pressure at the level of the pulmonary capillaries. Basically, the horse's capillary walls burst whenever a horse goes through stressful exercise because blood pressure is increased and capillary walls thin. Knowing how EIPH occurs will help you understand how to treat it. Now that we've discussed what EIPH is and how bleeding occurs, let's discuss, is EIPH treatable, and if so, how? The Horse magazine states that there is no cure for bleeding, but you can treat it. As I mentioned earlier, I have a horse that bleeds every time I perform in barrel racing with him. I contacted my local vet to try to help him out. My vet recommended me Lasix. This drug is regularly used for bleeders, horses that are known for bleeding. Lasix dehydrates the horse just enough so that it decreases the pressure on the capillary walls. My vet assured me that this was safe as long as I used as he instructed, because I was very worried. How would I get the maximum performance from my horse if I dehydrated him before performing? Now that my horse gets Lasix, he is much happier with his job and loves performing and working for me. Knowing how bleeding how to treat bleeding will help you and your equine athletes in the future. In conclusion, EIPH affects many equine athletes. People need to know more about it and how to manage it to keep their performing with their horses. This speech was meant to inform everyone about exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhage and treatment for it. I wanted to go over what EIPH is, how it occurs, and if so, how is it treatable. Now that you know EIPH is treatable and what happens, you will be more prepared if this happens to you or your equine athletes. Thank you.